одразу без запізнення. Це дуже добре. Рівно в 2 годині нас багато хто дивиться, так що я хочу представити пана посла Великобританії в Україні, пана Саймона Сміта. I'm very pleased to present Simon Smith, His Excellency, the British Ambassador to Ukraine. This is his 3rd time here, if I'm not mistaken, and we were very happy to have here his boss, William Hague, Foreign Secretary. Back in early May, we also had a delegation from the British Parliament in April. So we are very happy to have you here, Mr. Ambassador. So please, the floor is yours. We're expecting your briefing on the position of the British government, on the events in Ukraine, and on some of the recent developments. So here you go.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much for coming to listen to me for my, as Vasil has said, my 3rd visit to the Media Crisis Centre. Very good to be back. I would like just to share with you for a few minutes, before I open the floor to questions, just to run through the British government's take on a few of the most recent developments in Ukraine, talk a little bit about the meeting of European Union foreign ministers that we saw yesterday, and what we have in the week ahead in terms of opportunities to make progress on the issues in Ukraine as the week rolls ahead. The first thing to say is that the United Kingdom government very much welcomed the peace plan announced by President Poroshenko on Friday, very much welcomed the ceasefire that President Poroshenko announced then, and clearly as representatives of our government made clear at yesterday's European Union Foreign Affairs Council meeting, clearly we think this is an important opportunity. It's an important step taken by President Poroshenko and his administration, creating a new opportunity, a new situation in which the parties can sit down and talk about constructive ways forward. And of course, we welcome the fact that there has been, indeed, since the announcement of the ceasefire, there has been a further session of talks between the parties to conflict in the east of the country. And we do feel it is important that all parties should engage constructively on looking positively for a peaceful way forward from the situation that now exists. But that, when we say in the British government, when we say all parties, we very much include our firm assumption that that includes the Russian Federation, that includes Russia taking its responsibility and Russia engaging constructively in the effort to find a peaceful and consensual way forward on what is going on. Now, the meeting of European Union foreign ministers yesterday was their first chance to get together and to discuss the implications of the peace plan and ceasefire, to express their support for the peace plan and ceasefire, which they did in the published conclusions from the Foreign Affairs Council, which I'm sure all of you have seen. It was also their first opportunity to hear directly from the new Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Pavlo Klimkin. And it was also their opportunity in the conclusions that they emitted from the Foreign Affairs Council to remind the world, remind their publics of, in a sense, where we started in enunciating the European Union position on this, and to remind that in response to the Russian acts of aggression and the illegal annexation of Crimea, and following that in response to evidence of continuing Russian efforts to destabilize the situation in Ukraine, that European Union leaders had made it clear that what they expected to see from Russia was positive action on de-escalation and an end to actions which destabilize the situation. Very much consistent with that, the Foreign Affairs Council in its conclusions yesterday called on Russia to use its influence on separatists, to encourage them to lay down their arms. It also called on Russia to stop the flow of illegal militants and weapons across the border. It made very clear that the governments of the European Union regard this very much as a responsibility, as a duty that lies on Russia. Again, as I mentioned, to take positive action to de-escalate and to stop destabilizing action. And there was a repeated signal in the Council conclusions that work on the sanctions dimension, that work on sanctions continues. And in the words of the conclusions, they made very clear that further steps can be taken, I'm quoting, further steps can be taken should events in eastern Ukraine so require. So there is a very clear message there that says this is an opportunity. But if the opportunity is not taken by all parties concerned, and if responsibility is not accepted, then that process of going further into sanctions measures, that process will continue. And of course, we have another opportunity for European leaders to meet on the 27th of June. That's on Friday this week, when the June European Council meets. That, of course, is a meeting that's very much in the regular schedule of meetings of European Union heads of state and government. And so in that sense, it's been planned for, I would guess, over a year. It wasn't envisaged that Ukraine would be on the agenda when that meeting was originally planned, but clearly Ukraine will be on the agenda. It is not possible to envisage a meeting of European Union leaders without Ukraine being on the agenda these days. And I think that a very good opportunity has been taken here to ensure that that meeting coincides with the opportunity for the European Union to sign the remaining parts of the association agreement with Ukraine, and those parts which open the way for implementation of the deep and comprehensive free trade area. So that is all going to be done at the European Council on Friday. And again, I think that will be an opportunity for European Union leaders to assess what has been done in the meantime, to take this opportunity provided by the ceasefire and the peace plan. Just to mention a couple more things, one of the things that I would like to flag up that also arose from the European Union Foreign Affairs Council meeting was the agreement on what's called a CSDP mission, a European Union Common Security and Defence Policy mission. This is an initiative that's been under discussion for some while. It's an initiative which has from the start had the very strong support of the British government. And the idea is to put together an initiative which, in very practical, but also in terms of policy advice and in terms of advice on devising strategy, an initiative which supports the construction of effective, sustainable, efficient and accountable security and law and order services in Ukraine. And I think this is something that has been put together. This initiative has come against the background of what has been, I think, correctly perceived as something of a collapse in confidence in many parts of Ukraine in security and policing structures, and a recognition that in order to regain this confidence, that some fairly fundamental reforms and restructuring were needed. And so this initiative from the European Union, this CSDP initiative in the field of security sector reform, the details are still to be, there's still a lot of work to be done on working out what the details of this will be, a lot of discussion with Ukrainian counterparts in implementing what is envisaged, but I think that was an important step forward agreed by the Foreign Affairs Council yesterday to launch into this security sector mission. And it's one in which the British government will certainly be looking to play a very active part. We'll be looking for opportunities to supply advice, expertise, support, personnel to participate in this mission. So we'll be taking a very close interest in the way in which the terms of reference of the mission shape up over the next few weeks or so. And in that context, and finally, I'd also just like to flag up that we in the British Embassy are also now looking at a new phase of projects in the broad area of peace building, of building and restoring confidence across conflict divides. There's clearly a lot of work to be done in the realms of reconciliation, in the realms of reconciling differences between sectors of the population. And so we are launching another phase of what we call our sort of peace building initiative. Details of that are on the embassy's website, and we're calling for expressions of interest to work with us from Ukrainian partners over the next few weeks or so. And all that, and again this is my final word, all that very much done in the context of the very firm conviction that remains in the British government, which is that we want to work positively, constructively, alongside Ukraine in the building up, the development of a strong, successful, united Ukraine. And we're convinced that one of the ways we can most effectively do that is to be sharing our experience, to be sharing European Union experience, our practices, standards, and values to support this process, as I say, of building a strong, successful, united Ukraine. Thank you very much, and I'm very open to your questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The first question is from Igor Solovey in Interfax.
Інтерфакс України, Ігор Соловей. Буквально кілька десятків хвилин назад Путін вніс пропозицію про те, щоб відмінити той закон, який регламентував застосування Збройних сил Російської Федерації на території України. Як ви оцінюєте, будь ласка, цей крок? І чи на Заході його, як його на Заході оцінять? Дякую.
Well, like you, I only just heard a few minutes ago, I mean, in the last hour or so, I'd seen the initial reports that indeed, as you say, as I understand it, that President Putin had given instructions to the Federation Council to remove or rescind the order they'd given on the use of Russian troops on Ukrainian territory. And, you know, clearly in the sense that we feel in the British government that was a measure that never had justification. It was a measure that should never have been taken. To that extent, obviously, we think it's a good thing if that measure is now going to be rescinded. But I think we would say certainly that is the right thing to do. It was the wrong thing to do to introduce the measure in the first place. It's the right thing to do to cancel it if that's what's going to happen. But we would definitely say that the responsibility of Russia absolutely does not end there. The responsibility that Russia has, as we've been saying over the last few weeks, to take positive action to de-escalate, to take positive action in calling on separatists in the east of Ukraine to lay down their weapons and to participate in the search for a peaceful outcome to what's going on, and the call that we've made on Russia to take a grip on what is happening in terms of weapons and militants coming across the border. It's very clear to us that there remain a lot of things that still need to be done by Russia in order for Russia to measure up to its responsibility and its responsibility to play a constructive and active part in producing a solution to the problems, not simply adding to the problems.
Mr. Ambassador, here you go.
Mr. Ambassador, how ready is Great Britain to impose the third round of sanctions to Russia, assuming that Russia has not yet stopped all the aggression, despite the peaceful plan implementation? How realistic is that?
I think that it is very clear from the words that not just the British government, but the words that the leaders of the European Union have used, it is very clear that if they determine that Russia has actually not taken the actions that were required of it, and again, we go right back, as I've mentioned before, to the requirement to de-escalate and stop destabilization. Now, there is an argument that says that over the last few weeks, you can point to some examples of de-escalation. There is an argument, and there's part of the discussion within the European Union that said it was a welcome move by President Putin to say that he would respect the results of the presidential election in Ukraine. We've just been talking about one other much more recent move, which again, in terms of reversing an action which was wrong in the first place, can be construed as an action which is de-escalatory. We've seen one or two kind of movements of large concentrations of troops on the other side of the border from Ukraine, and again, some of those troops have moved back. So the landscape is not absent. I mean, the landscape is not bereft of de-escalatory actions. But I think that, as I was saying, the European leaders have made very clear that for Russia to fully accept its responsibility and its responsibility to participate positively and constructively in what's going on, it needs to do more. And so I think the logic of the message is to say, and again, you will have seen this in the conclusions of the Foreign Affairs Council yesterday, seen a very clear reference to the fact that the work on sanctions continues. It may not be the same as saying that every day there is a new sanction announced, but the work continues, and the European Union leaders are ready to assess the situation and to make a decision that says if we judge that not enough has been done and that we have seen an unsatisfactory absence of de-escalatory measures, or we see an unsatisfactory continuation of destabilizing activity, then the logic is that the progress towards the third tier of sanctions will continue.
Mr. Ambassador, Volodymyr Solhub, Deutsche Welle. I have two questions for you. First, regarding the border crossing between Ukraine and Russia, there is at least one border crossing control at Izvarno, which is being controlled by the separatists. How concerned is the United Kingdom of this development? And the second question regarding yesterday's negotiations between the separatists, the OSCE representatives, and Mr. Kuchma, Mr. Medvedchuk, and other politicians. Do you see this as a positive development in the crisis, Eastern Ukraine crisis?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I think as far as the situation on the border is concerned, I mean, clearly, yes, we are concerned about the degree of control, oversight, responsibility that is there for what is happening in terms of what's crossing the border, in terms of people, in terms of weapons, and so on. And so to that extent, it's very clear to us that any solution to the problem of what is going on, any solution to the confrontations that are taking place in that region, it's a very important element in all that people should have confidence that border crossings are under effective control, under effective supervision. And so to that extent, if there are parts of the border that are clearly not under effective control, that is an issue, that's a problem that needs to be addressed quickly. But I think that, and this comes on to the second part of your question, because I think that in a sense the sort of satisfactory border control regime is something that needs to be very much on the agenda of the talks that are going on. There needs clearly to be confidence that movements of people and weapons can be controlled. There needs to be confidence that the borders are not allowing across new waves of destabilizing elements, and so to that extent, again, my own understanding was that it was no surprise to see that in the context of the peace plan that was announced by President Poroshenko last week, it was no surprise to see that there is a particular concern about establishing confidence on what is happening on either side of the border. Now, as far as the talks themselves are concerned, I think that in very general terms, the view of the British government would be that really any process of dialogue that takes the opportunity to get people to sit down, talk about their differences, rather than shoot each other, has to be a good thing. It's clearly very early to judge on what sort of progress the talks made. It's I think even too early to judge whether, in fact, at the moment, this process of talks has actually succeeded in encouraging all parties to the conflict to commit to the outcome of the talks. And so clearly more progress needs to be made. And again, I repeat, this is where it's very important that Russia exerts its influence to send a very clear message to the separatist militants to say there is now a ceasefire, there is now a process of dialogue underway, and you guys need to commit to that and stop the continuation of armed conflict, stop the continuation of armed attacks in the region. So again, the process of talks is very much an opportunity, but I think that that it's very early to judge the extent to which that opportunity is really being gripped positively by all the participants who need to be involved in it.
Mr. Ambassador, as a moderator, I have the last question for you. And it's quite obvious that the reputation of Great Britain in Brussels has been dented recently. During the last 2 years, I should say. I mean, it's not a surprise, it's all in the media, and we see that. Now, especially with your government's fierce opposition to a possible appointment of Juncker as the president of the European Commission, don't you think that if he will be appointed still, that your position, British position on Ukraine, and your basically initiative to moderate sort of an EU position on Ukraine vis-a-vis will be undermined in a way, and your influence will be further diminished in Brussels? I mean, what's your view on that?
I'm going to start by disagreeing with your introductory bit of your question, because I think, yes, it's absolutely true. Nobody is denying that that in many respects the attitude of the position of the British government vis-a-vis the European Union, the position of many parts of the British population in relation to the European Union is a skeptical one, and it is one that, let's say, recognizes a number of important ways in which the European Union could improve and become more effective. And I think that actually you're right in a sense that this attitude is certainly a challenge to how we project our positions within the European Union. But I think what is often missed is how much respect we actually have within the European Union for a position which very firmly says, you know, there are ways in which the European Union has to reform and improve. It needs to be more effective. The last thing that we want to see is a European Union that, in a sense, loses the confidence of the populations of its member states. And I think that to some extent, what we saw in the recent elections to the European Parliament, maybe not in every member state of the European Union, but certainly in some of them, you saw a reflection of this, that in large parts of the population, the Union is losing the confidence of the electorate. And so proportionately, a larger share of people who actually don't like the Union and who want it to fail actually go out and vote and get their representatives into the European Parliament. Now, I think that a lot of the British government's conviction is to say it would be a bad thing if we lost the confidence, if we lost further confidence amongst the populations in the European Union. And for that reason, we need to work really hard to make sure the European Union is a more effective institution. We need to work particularly hard in ensuring that its single market structures are operating effectively across the board, across the full range of goods and services. We need to make sure that the European Union is not continuing to lose the confidence of people by taking decisions that it should not be taking in Brussels, but that people can take for themselves in their own towns, villages, counties, whatever. So we will continue to be very forceful arguers on that reform agenda. But as I say, I think that there is, yes, it creates friction within the European Union. There's no denying that. But actually also it wins us some respect. This brings me to the second part of the question, which is that, as I say, I think that we can continue as a respected voice within the European Union, respected for our determination to reform the Union. I think that we can continue on that basis also to earn respect for the robust position that we've taken on Ukraine, the robust position that we've taken with other member states in the European Union to keep the spotlight on Russia, to keep ensuring that people understand how serious the responsibilities of Russia are in all this. And my final point is to say that you will know we are not on our own in this. There are other very influential European Union members who, again, have taken a very forward role in concentrating the minds of European Union decision makers on what it is that needs to be done in this situation, and to say that the wrong thing to do is to sit there and sort of say, well, it's all a very difficult situation, let's hope for the best. But the right thing to do is to say, unless action is being taken by all concerned to engage positively and constructively in this situation, then we are prepared to demonstrate that there is a cost for withholding that cooperation and that there is a cost in terms of sanctions measures for not taking that responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Master. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention.